David, thank you for coming in. You made the point last week, which attracted some controversy, that actually a little bit of warming in the UK could be quite good for us.
Well, absolutely. It's a simple statement of fact, in fact, and I was quoting a government agency in what I said, that many more people die in this country from the cold than from the heat. So the idea that a little increase in temperature is going to make things worse simply does not stand up. Of course, that's not the whole picture. There's much more to it, but that, from that narrow perspective, it's absolutely clear.
And that the net zero agenda was turned into law by 2019 for the 2050 deadline being set. At that point, the economy was still going well. There'd been no COVID. There hadn't been £500 billion spent on COVID measures. The nation's balance sheet was in pretty good order. All the political parties thought this was a cost that people could absorb and bear. That's fundamentally changed, hasn't it, in the last 4 years?
It absolutely has. And to be honest, I thought it looked a bit unwise in 2019. But as you say, maybe it was something we could have supported. But now conditions have changed a lot. That's absolutely clear. And the bill is now not quite so far away. People are beginning to see it, and they're beginning to think about what's going to happen to their lifestyles, and they're not sure they like it.
But this has become politically quite divisive. We heard from Thangam Debonair earlier her views on this matter.
Quite frankly, I'm astonished that Rishi Sunak is doubling down on his failing and weak policy on climate action. Businesses and individuals and families have suffered 13 years of failing Tory energy policy. That has left us the worst hit of any Western European country during this energy crisis. Instead, Rishi Sunak is pushing ahead as though climate crisis isn't happening. It's clear, it's present danger. As the head of the UN said only this last week, the age of global warming is over, the age of global boiling has arrived. And this sort of policy making, having called for leaders to lead, is such a disappointment.
Well, she puts it, of course, in a slightly exaggerated tone. But her point is we're in the age of global boiling rather than simply of warming. Is there any evidence for that, as far as you're aware?
Well, climate change is a problem. It isn't. We're not in a climate crisis or in a climate emergency, in my view. I don't think the evidence supports that. It's a problem that we can master. And what we're seeing, to be honest, what we've been seeing today in this hysterical reaction, not just from Thangam Debonair, but from others, is people who are having to justify their positions for the first time. Up to now, this has not been questioned. Now we're having a discussion. It's great.
And that's really important, because she was saying that 13 years of Tory failures with energy policy, but actually such failures as there have been is because we've accepted the consensus, and if we were to do more of the same, that's when we get to the risk of the lights going.
That's right. I mean, the Labour policy is based on this fantasy that we can get rid of oil and gas, we can decarbonise the grid by 2030. It's simply not going to happen, simply not possible. One has to get real about this, and there are ways of reducing emissions in a proportionate and sensible way. Modern gas power stations, nuclear power stations, investment in new technology is the way forward. It isn't doubling down on wind power that doesn't work well.
And that must be right, that you've seen with the internal combustion engine, with cars, emissions declining dramatically over decades, lead going out of petrol, miles per gallon increasing, that everyone has an interest in that because it makes the use of energy cheaper and therefore the technology develops.
When people are given a better product, they tend to choose it. The problem is that what we are trying to do at the moment is force on people products that aren't better and make them pay more for it. And that is going to be a hard sell, probably an impossible sell. And it's very good that we're rethinking now rather than letting this go a bit further down the line.
And letting the market choose seems to me to be a key point. That I thought Lord Bamford's comments recently were very important, that the government has decided to give huge subsidies to electric motors, but actually he has developed a hydrogen motor, which may be both cleaner and more economic for people, but the government is skewing the scales. Now, in your experience, does the government ever pick winners successfully?
I mean, the government never picks winners. It is inherent that nobody knows the future. Nobody knows what the best way of getting around is going to be. Maybe it's going to be electric cars, maybe it's going to be hydrogen, maybe it's going to be something else that we haven't invented yet. The best way of doing that is for the government to be as neutral as possible in the decisions it takes and let the markets choose. But we're not doing that. We're leaping at the first technologies that are available, and it's costing more than it need to.
And very often the first technology doesn't work so well.
Yeah.
I'm very impressed with what the Prime Minister is saying at the moment. He's saying, to my mind, all the right things. He's recognised the problem. He's recognised in electoral terms that most Conservative voters are motorists and that he's on their side. But what, in your view, does he need to do to make the change, say that between now and the next election, people notice some difference?
Well, I think there are some retail things he needs to do. The 2030 ban on internal combustion engines, I mean, that is even tougher than the European Union's measures. We didn't leave the EU to impose even tougher measures on ourselves, so that's one. We could push that back. The imposition of boilers, the heat pump boilers, the ban on oil boilers that's coming in, those are the things that people will notice.
But both of those, the government has confirmed that it is continuing with and will not change. As I think Michael Gove this afternoon has said the heat pumps are carrying on, and the Prime Minister himself has said the 2030 ban on diesel and petrol engines. This doesn't seem to me to make any sense. He's got a popular policy. Why isn't it being implemented?
Still time to rethink. Governments always say that policy doesn't change up to the point at which it changes. And I think the polling and the economic reality is going to force a rethink.
And devolution or banning ULEZ. There was an interesting article in the Times today saying you haven't devolved all these powers to councils, then to take them away, then we'd do something you don't like. I think we are a unitary state and that the central government should use its powers to stop people suffering from unfair policies. Where do you stand on this?
So I do think probably the government ought to intervene on this. I think it's been a failing of democracy that has not been properly debated. And I think there's every democratic case for, if we can, imposing a delay until the mayoral election next year, and then it is an electoral issue that people can have their say on.